Good morning. Second hour, honors history continued, January 23rd, 2020. Okay, and yesterday we finished up talking about troubles that farmers were having with crop prices dropping rapidly. Okay, and so Hoover asked for a revision on the textile tariff. So textiles, right? Clothing, sheets, all this stuff, towels. What they wanted to do was prevent those products from coming in from other countries so that the prices would go up for cotton and for our textile industry, okay? Hoover, so he asked for that. Congress comes back with something much greater called the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act. Hawley-Smoot? Anyone? Anyone? Bueller? Bueller? Oh, you've seen it?
Yeah.
Ferris Bueller's Day Off? Okay. So, guys, in the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the teacher they cast, the actor to play the teacher in the classroom, is a guy named Ben Stein. All right? Ben Stein is not just an actor that does dry eye commercials and so forth. He used to have a comedy show on Comedy Central called Win Ben Stein's Money. Really smart guy. So it's like a trivia game, and if you defeated Ben Stein, you won his money. Well, he rarely lost. Okay, he is a Harvard-educated economist and an actor. Okay, so they cast him for this movie, and they said, "Oh, we want you to sound really boring, like Mr. Trail, in a very monotone voice, and just talk about something boring in history." So he talks about the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, okay? And I want to play that clip for you if you don't mind. It's pretty funny. Okay. Let's see. I've got it pulled up, ready to go here.
Adams, here. Adam Lee.
Here.
Adamowski. Adamson.
Here.
Adler.
Here.
Anderson. Anderson.
Here.
Bueller. 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 Bueller.
He's sick. My best friend's sister's boyfriend's brother's girlfriend heard from this guy who knows this kid is going with the girl who saw Ferris pass out at 31 Flavors last night. I guess it's pretty serious.
Thank you, Simone.
No problem whatsoever.
Fry. In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? The tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
Okay. I did tell my fifth hour that those students in the movie really reminded me of them. Because already this semester, my fifth hour is ahead of you guys. Because they just sit there. And they never say anything. Okay? Staring at me. Like these students who are here. Okay? So, but in reality, Ben Stein, as an economist, realizes the importance of the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act. And as you can see just from the notes here, right? This is going to boost tariffs on thousands of items within 17 months. Trade, imports and exports in this country are cut in half. Okay, so this is going to be devastating on the economy because we are not exporting. Okay, and that's going to mean that our production slows down even more, and more people are going to lose their jobs. Okay? Where'd that come from? Nice hands. Okay. All right, so Joseph, yesterday you had asked a question about, and I talked about banks. Okay, so one of the this is another cause of the Great Depression, is bank failures. Okay, and I want to kind of talk about this, why that happened. Now, it started mostly with rural banks because of the farmers. So when the crop prices dropped, they couldn't make a living, they couldn't pay back their loans. You guys know when you guys have a bank account, that money doesn't stay in the bank. The bank lends that money out. That's how banks make money, by lending your money out. And they give you a little bit of interest, right? So if you had $1 million in the bank, I don't know, interest might have $1 million laying around, but they might have to transfer some money from other banks to get that $1 million for you to take out in cash. Okay? So they don't keep all that money at the bank. They lend it out, and when those loans go unpaid, you've got a problem. And I wanted to mention something else, because this was in the video I showed you yesterday, the short video clip on the stock market. And I usually talk about it right after the video, but I was distracted, so I apologize. I'm going to talk about it now. Okay? And that is what's called margin loans. I don't know how closely you were paying attention to that short 3-minute video yesterday, but they mentioned these. Did anybody catch what they were? Margin loans? Okay. So what happens is the stock market kept going up, and people wanted to get into the market, but they didn't have enough money to. So they borrowed money to invest in the stock market, and banks lent them money to invest in the stock market. Well, this would be kind of like me going down to Intrust Bank today and saying, I'm going to go to the dog track down in Oklahoma, and I know the number 6 dog in the number 5 race is a guaranteed winner. I only have $100. I'd really like to put $1,000 down. Can I borrow $900? And then when I win that dog race tonight, I'll pay you back tomorrow. And the bank says, sure, here's $900. That's what people were doing. They were borrowing money to invest in the stock market, which is crazy. So the banks, guys, are giving out these loans when the stock market crashed. Individuals that got margin loans, not only did they lose...
Sarah Evans to the office.
What? Who?
Sarah Evans.
Wrong class.
Okay, sorry.
That scared the crap out of me. Not only do you lose your initial investment, you go into debt with the bank. And are these people going to be able to pay back these loans? No. So you take the farmers that can't pay back their loans. You take the margin loans that people can't pay back. Then you got people losing their jobs because of a slowdown in production, which means they're going to have a hard time paying back their auto loans, their mortgages on their homes. Banks are in trouble. Okay? Another factor is this. Because trade was cut in half, less foreign money is coming into our country. There's less trade coming in and out. There's less cash flow. Banks don't have as much cash. And really, guys, this is an issue of cash. So let me go through this with you. And by the way, you're going to have to write about this on the test. Bank failures. Okay? So, when foreign deposits slowed and there was less money coming into the country and out of the country, the banks had less cash. When farmers' crop prices dropped, and then we had the Dust Bowl on top of that, and farmers couldn't pay back their loans, the banks had less cash. Thank you for playing, Joseph. Cash. Come on, this is supposed to be a chorus. When people borrowed money called margin loans to invest in the stock market crashed. They not only went into debt, losing their investment, they couldn't pay back the banks, and the banks had less cash. Better, okay? When people lost their jobs, they couldn't pay their mortgages, and the banks had less cash. When the people found out the banks were short on cash, they all rushed to the banks to get out their cash, and the banks ran out of cash, and the banks closed their doors. There's no insurance. There's no FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. When the banks ran out of money, they closed their doors. Many never reopened. I'm going to show you a little video on this here in a second. It'll tell you 9 million people lost their entire savings accounts across this country. Okay? Now there's a, yeah.
On the notes, is it supposed to say 298 instead of 2298?
Here?
Yeah.
2294. Yeah, is that what you're talking about?
Is that like how many banks there were?
Yeah, that's how many banks failed in that year.
Oh, how many failed?
Yeah. Yeah. So overall, I mean, this takes 29 through 1933. So guys, back in 2009, 2010, we actually had some banks going under as well, even though we did have FDIC. But this, I mean, like you can see, 1933, I mean, so this kind of really started in the rural areas and then spread into the cities with bank failures, okay? So people are going to lose, some of the people are going to lose their life savings. All right, it gets bad. So, and actually I think one day we'll be watching a video on the Depression, and they'll talk about this as well, okay? So, let me show you that video. It's just like a 2-3 minute video on bank failures. And it kind of just re-explains what we talked about.
Black Tuesday may have signaled the start of the Great Depression, but the collapse of the stock market wasn't the only cause of the nation's financial woes. The federal government of the 1920s had supported big business with low interest rates and very little governmental regulation, especially over the stock market. In turn, many businesses borrowed more money to expand than they could ever afford to repay. High tariffs that had kept American business owners happy because they kept foreign-made products out of the U.S. unfortunately meant many European countries were unable and increasingly unwilling to buy American-made products. For instance, Germany was barely able to pay the World War I reparations she owed, and high tariffs like the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, passed by Congress in 1930, only made matters worse. The tariff's goal was to protect American farmers and manufacturers, but it backfired. America found itself unable to sell her farm goods and manufactured products abroad. World trade in turn faltered as foreign countries imposed severe tariffs of their own in retaliation. Many key industries were struggling even before Black Tuesday. Throughout the boom times of the Roaring '20s, agriculture had been in a tailspin. The textile, steel, automobile, and railroad industries were also beginning to feel the pinch. As the unemployment rate increased, most families bought even less. The gap between the handful of wealthy Americans and the rest of the population got even wider. Even though most Americans had not profited from the economic boom of the 1920s, They bought many exciting new products and services during this era of unrestricted credit, living well beyond their means. The banking industry, too, was hard hit. Some banks had invested heavily in the stock market and helplessly stood by as that money vaporized into thin air. As Americans began to realize the pitiful state of the troubled economy, many panicked and rushed to withdraw their savings from banks. Many banks simply couldn't instantly produce the cash demanded and instead shut their doors, leaving depositors with nothing. Bank failures wiped out nearly 9 million individual savings accounts. 659 banks were closed in 1929, and by 1933, 1/4 of America's banks had failed.
Yeah, so 1/4 of the banks, that's a huge number, obviously. And this will be a cause of the Great Depression, and really a cause for the depths and how deep we go into depression are these bank failures, okay? So, something to remember for the future. Hello? Okay, yeah, that's the video I just showed you. Okay, so as we sink into this depression, just going to talk about some of the impact it has on society and the individual, okay? So factory owners couldn't sell the products, obviously, because people didn't have money to buy them. So slow down production or shut down production, lay off workers. Some who lost their savings in the banks and so forth couldn't buy anything. And so severe economic depression will happen here and around the world. Okay, it will spread. Well, guys, this slide is black and white, okay? And it's dreary. It's sad. This picture here was a Pulitzer Prize winning photograph that you'll find in pretty much every history textbook made since the 1960s. And the title of the photograph is Migrant Worker, okay? And, a picture tells 1,000 words. You can see the look on this woman's face. Obviously, she's a hardened woman. She's got her kids with her. She's thinking, how did we get here? She's thinking, how do I feed my kids their next meal? These sorts of things would go through your mind when looking at this photograph. And so it's hard to kind of put yourself in that moment and understand what it was like during the Depression, because we live in a colored world where, we see things in color. This makes things look worse. Look, at the height of the Depression, about 25% of Americans were unemployed. About 25%. Okay? So that means that 75% were employed. You follow me? So the country just doesn't come to a standstill. Okay? The country continues to move. There's just a lot of people that are hurting economically. They're losing their homes. They're selling everything they have. They become migrants. They move from one place to another. Many homeless people. It's a very difficult situation. That's really why I like cinema or film, and to watch a movie that kind of can help you get a good feel for what that was like. And there are some good movies out there. Did any of you guys ever have to read The Grapes of Wrath in middle school or see the movie The Grapes of Wrath? Okay, that kind of used to be like part of everybody's curriculum. In fact, my first couple years teaching this class, I showed the movie The Grapes of Wrath. Now, it was in black and white, and it's about an Oklahoma family, the Joad family, and it's very dark, it's slow. Most of my students fell asleep, so I stopped showing it. Okay? It was dry. But the storyline, and I believe the author, I don't want to misstate the author. And I should know this. I feel bad for not. I want to say James Michener, but I'm not positive on that. Okay. So anyhow, the author really describes what happens to a family that lives on a farm in Oklahoma when they lose the farm and they go to California. Okay. You guys can see by 1932 there were 12 million able-bodied Americans unemployed. Now there's roughly 120 million people in the United States. Some of those people are too old to work, some of them are too young to work. So this will equate to about 25% unemployment. Okay, but that doesn't tell the whole story. Many of the people that did have jobs had part-time jobs. Let me give you an example of how that would happen. Out in Colwich, there's one grocery store. You guys live out there? Kraus grocery store, okay? And let's say prior to the Depression in 1929, Kraus had 10 full-time employees, okay? And you had a butcher, you had your checkout people, your bag boy, cart boy, all that, right? Well, the Depression hits, and not as many people are buying stuff from that grocery store, Kraus. And so the owner of the store says, I've got to lay some people off. But in a small community like Colwich, you know these people that work for you. They live in your neighborhood. They're kind of like family. Everybody knows each other. And you don't want to leave them with nothing. So instead of laying off 5 people, you make all 10 part-time. And that way, at least they have some type of income to maybe feed their kids, maybe keep a roof over their head, maybe not. Okay, but at least some income, a job. Okay, so there were a lot of people that just had part-time work. And so the unemployment rate is important. It's worse than 25%. The impact on society, we started to see what were called Hoovervilles. Okay, now obviously this is a dig on the president. Okay, so where homeless people gathered in, scraps of wood, cardboard, that sort of thing, to build basically what they called shanty towns or Hoovervilles. This one here, pictured here, is in Central Park in New York City. And it was actually quite a large Hooverville in Central Park. These are squatters. They have nowhere to go. They've been evicted from their homes, and they don't have money to stay in a hotel or something like that. So they build a little shack on public property and live there. Okay, so homelessness, Hoover would call the greatest tragedy of the Depression. Okay, homelessness was the worst thing about the Depression, especially for children and so forth. How many of you guys have ever seen the movie Cinderella Man? I highly recommend this film. It's very well done, and I think it gives you a really good picture of what it was like to live during the Depression. There's a boxer named Jim Braddock. Okay, he's a good fighter, and he's a heavyweight, and he breaks his hand, and the Depression hits, and he tries to keep fighting with a broken hand, and eventually he's going to be banned from boxing because of how awful his fights are, because it's fans are paying to go watch, and he's trying to box with one hand, and they say you can't fight anymore. So he loses his income, tries to find work from time to time, but they hit the skids, and they got 3 kids. They can't turn on the heat, they can't turn on the electricity, and you really see what happened to people. Okay, and it kind of takes you through that. Now there's a happy ending. Okay, but it's got Renee Zellweger. What's her name? Renee Zell. Yeah, and then the boxer's played by Russell Crowe. So good cast, and Paul Giamatti's in it, who's an awesome actor, one of my favorites. Okay, all right. So marriage rates dropped by 1/3. People can't afford to start a family. Okay. College enrollment is going to sink. People can't afford it. And then millions will go hungry. Now, guys, in all the study I've done of the Great Depression, I've never read anywhere that anybody in the United States starved to death. There was not starvation. There was hunger. Now, hunger can lead to health problems, malnutrition, yes, especially in the young and the old. All right, so that is going to be a problem. And I have a video, okay, that will accompany this and kind of show you a little bit about the Dust Bowl and the depths of the Depression. Okay, need my mouse. This is pretty good, and it really explains kind of the area of the Dust Bowl and so forth.
Then, to make matters even worse, drought, coupled with the overproduction of crops in the Great Plains, turned the area from Texas to Oklahoma into a dust bowl. In 1934, strong winds blew tons of dust from the plains all the way to the East Coast. Dust even coated New York City and settled on ships 500 miles out to sea in the Atlantic Ocean. Unemployment and poverty hurt everyone, especially children. Many left school to work and help their families survive, and many more went hungry and malnourished. Diet-related illnesses like rickets and scoliosis became all too common. Once again, President Hoover tried to reassure the nation by saying, "Recovery is just around the corner." But it was not to be, and more Americans grew disenchanted with his policies and administration. Secretary of the Treasury Andrew Mellon echoed the beliefs of most of Hoover's advisors, that the economy would recover on its own. Hoover thought the government must take some action, but feared making government too strong, and so he chose a conservative approach, calling together business, banking, and labor leaders and urging them to work together and avoid laying off workers or calling strikes. Then he authorized the expenditure of federal funds for large public works projects, like Boulder Dam, later renamed Hoover Dam, to create jobs and wages for thousands of workers. Hoover felt giving direct help to needy Americans would undermine their self-respect and looked to private charities to help the hungry. Instead, he approved more than $2 billion in emergency financing to businesses, hoping their renewed success would trickle down to the people who needed assistance. It didn't. Rather, unemployment rose even higher, and Americans were caught in a web of despair.
Okay, so quite a bit in there. Hoover, again, remember yesterday I talked about was willing to loan money, but he's not going to give you something for nothing. Remember that? Okay, so that's a theme. And what you saw with the Dust Bowl, which is pretty interesting, you know, the worst year for the Dust Bowl was 1935, okay? And so if you had a great-grandparent that was around, you know, old enough to remember somebody born probably by 1925, you know, they'd be 95 years old now, okay? So there are still people around that did witness these, but they, you know, they're horrible. You learned about this in Kansas history, right? Like when you were in 7th grade or whatever, about how bad the dust storms were and so forth. Well, I found a video that's in color that kind of shows you what these dust storms were like. It's only about 1 minute and 15 seconds long, and I want to show it to you. Now, the proper term for a dust storm like this is called a haboob. H-A-B-O-O-B, a haboob, okay? So you guys can go home and tell your parents what you learned in school today. It's got some pretty cool music to it. This is in Phoenix in 2010. Yeah. Yeah, most people are stopping. That was
It's only a family vacation if all the family is together.
okay. All right, so yeah, the Dust Bowl. Oop, what's next? Oh, yeah. Okay, how much time do I have?
10 minutes, 5 minutes.
Yardberry, go back to sleep. Okay, let's see here. Mass schedule, second period 35. Okay, yeah, we're going to do this. All right, so remember the bonus bill, the Adjusted Compensation Act. Told you we'd be coming back to it. It's where you got $1 for every day you served overseas, $1.25 or $1.25 every day overseas, $1 for every day at home. Remember that?
Yeah.
For the veterans?
Yes.
Yes. And I said that those insurance policies would not mature until 1945, but you could borrow up to 25% of it. Okay? And many veterans did. But when the Depression hit, okay, the bonus army, as they will be referred to, is going to march on Washington. And they're going to ask that their insurance policies be cashed in now because of the Depression. So they all go there to support this bill that is in Congress. And you think, this many veterans, they say between 20 and 25,000 of them, and their families show up in Washington. Now, do these people have money to stay in hotel rooms? No. So Hoover actually opened up some empty government buildings and so forth, let them stay there while the bill was going through Congress. Well, guys, the bill that went through Congress didn't make it through Congress. It failed. So now you have all these veterans there. Some of them have nowhere to go. They're homeless. So most of them leave, but a couple thousand stay behind. Where else are you going to go? So they set up a Hooverville or a shanty town in the nation's capital. And some of these people are starting to cause some problems. And so there's some riots. And after a few weeks of this, Hoover's like, these people need to go away. They need to move along. So Hoover calls in the army to go in and remove these people from their little shanty town. In charge of this operation will be a couple of future famous American generals. If I can find it. There it is. One of them, Eisenhower. The other one, Douglas MacArthur. They're going to be in charge of this operation to remove these soldiers, or former soldiers, these veterans. So the veterans are in their shanty town. There's Eisenhower smoking a cigarette and General MacArthur wiping off some sweat. They're going to send in the infantry. These guys will be on horseback. They're going to have some tanks. They're going to roll into this shanty town, and chaos is going to break out. 2 people are going to die. They're going to burn the shanty town down to the ground. Tear gas. The president has just called out the United States Army on the veterans of World War I. How are the optics on this? How's this looking?
Not good.
This is not going to turn out well for Hoover. And by the way, guys, this is an election year. Okay, so as far as Hoover having a chance of being reelected, it's not going to happen. Okay? I'm going to show you, I'll finish class with a video of that. But one thing else in the notes I wanted to talk about was the first part. I kind of jumped to this. So, yes, there was violence and looting. It wasn't widespread. People would steal food because they were hungry. Okay? There were forced evictions. So like when you could no longer pay your mortgage, you'd have a few weeks to get out. If you did not remove yourself from the premises, the sheriff would come and remove you. It was not uncommon to see people put all of their possessions on the sidewalk in front of their apartment or their home and have an auction right there to auction off all their possessions so that they had money to go somewhere else. Okay? And between 1930 and 1934, 1 million family farms would be lost. Okay? 1 million family farms. How many people do you think lived on the average family farm?
Like 6 or 7.
6, 7, yeah, some more than that. I mean, mom and dad, you're going to have some kids, right? You need some kids to help take care of the farm and so forth. Grandma and grandpa. You might have, the aunt that never married or something like that. Okay? Hanging around. So let's say conservatively, 6 people on the average family farm. Okay? That's 6 million people in a 4-year period that are going to be driven from the land that they farm. Where are they going to go? Huh? The author of the book, John Steinbeck, The Grapes of Wrath, I remembered finally, okay? John Steinbeck, would have you believe that they all went to California. Okay? A lot did go to California because there were the promise of jobs in California. Like picking vegetables and fruits. Okay? And, but you're right. Most of them went to the cities. Okay? A lot did go to California, where there was no work. So think about this, guys. Take a city like, or a town like Hutchinson, Kansas. You've all been to Hutch, right? And you got these people that are leaving Kansas City because there's no jobs there, they've lost their home, and they're moving west. And they decide to come through Hutch. The people in Hutch, do they want these migrants to stay in Hutch? Because they don't have any jobs for these people in Hutchinson. So migrants, as they were moving across the country, were shunned by communities across the country. They did not want you to stay there. Move along. Keep moving. We don't want you here. We have our own problems. We don't need your problems. You follow me? Okay, so that was pretty common to see. It was really hard on some people, all right? And then back to the bonus thing, the bonus army. This, you can see the Capitol in the background. You can see the shantytown burning here. Yeah?
Did anyone during the Depression try to flee the country, like to Canada or Mexico?
In a video I'll be showing you, maybe tomorrow, we'll see. They talk about, for the first time in American history, more people were leaving the United States than coming to the United States. And some of those people, you know where they were going? The Soviet Union, where they had communism. Okay? Guys, this is pretty important. The Great Depression is a failure of capitalism. It's a failure of democracy. And there will be people, especially some of these people that were living in Hoovervilles, that would support more radical ideas to get us out of this depression. Okay? And so some of the ideas that we're going to see overseas, in Russia, and in a place called Nazi Germany, and a thing called fascism, will be imported here. And people were going to try them here during the Great Depression. All right? There will be movements towards communism and socialism through the Depression and fascism, as we will discuss. I do not have time to show you the video on the bonus army, but I will begin with that next time I teach. I do have a video that I may save, so not sure what we're going to do tomorrow yet, but I will probably not be lecturing, okay? But we'll do something. Good? All right? Have a great day. stay dry and warm out there.